It only took 41 seconds for Prince Harry to completely destroy his reputation on live television with one shocking comment that left George Stephanopoulos speechless and the entire studio in absolute chaos. The Good Morning America studio buzzed with its usual energy that Tuesday morning. Camera operators adjusted their angles, producers whispered final instructions through headsets, and makeup artists applied last-minute touches. But today felt different. Today, they were hosting royalty. George Stephanopoulos sat behind the iconic curved desk, his notes perfectly organized, his tie straight. 25 years of broadcast journalism had prepared him for difficult interviews, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. Good morning. I'm George Stephanopoulos, and we have a very special guest joining us today. He began with his trademark warm smile. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, is here to discuss his new charitable initiative. Welcome to Good Morning America, Your Royal Highness. Prince Harry walked onto the set with an air of confidence that immediately struck everyone as odd. His stride was too casual, his smile too smug. He settled into the guest chair without waiting for direction, crossing his legs and leaning back like he owned the studio. Thanks for having me, George, Harry said, but his tone carried something sharp. Though I have to say, this setup is quite different from what I'm used to back home. George maintained his professional composure. Well, we're honored to have you here. Let's start with your new project supporting veterans' mental health. Can you tell our viewers about this important initiative? Look, George, Harry interrupted, his voice taking on a condescending edge. I appreciate the softball question, but let's be honest here. You Americans don't really understand what real service looks like. I've served in Afghanistan. I've seen actual combat. Most of your audience probably thinks military service means sitting behind a desk. The studio fell silent. Camera operators exchanged glances. George's smile faltered for just a moment before his professionalism kicked back in. Well, Prince Harry, I think many of our viewers, including our veterans watching at home, would disagree with that characterization. America has a proud military tradition and... A tradition of what exactly? Harry cut him off again, his voice rising slightly. Dropping bombs from 30,000 feet and calling it bravery? Please. When I was in Helmand Province, I was on the ground, face to face with real danger, not hiding behind technology like your so-called heroes. George's jaw tightened. 25 years of experience told him to stay calm, but something in Harry's tone was pushing boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Your Royal Highness, I think you're making some very broad generalizations about American service members who have sacrificed greatly for their country. Perhaps we could focus on the positive aspects of... George, Harry said with a dismissive wave of his hand. This is exactly the problem with American media. You're so afraid of real talk. You want everything sugar-coated and safe. Back home, journalists actually ask tough questions. Here, you're just cheerleaders in suits. The insult hit its mark. George straightened in his chair, his professional mask slipping just enough to show the steel underneath. I've been asking tough questions in this business since before you were born, Prince Harry. And I've interviewed everyone from presidents to dictators. So perhaps you'd like to reconsider that assessment. Born? Harry laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. George, you're talking to someone who was born into a position you could never understand. I've been dealing with real pressure since I was a child. You've been asking softball questions to politicians who lie to your face. There's a difference. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop 10 degrees. Even the seasoned production crew, who had seen everything in 20 years of morning television, were stunned by the raw arrogance pouring from the guest chair. George took a deep breath, drawing on every ounce of his professional training. Well, let's talk about that position you were born into. Your recent comments about the royal family have been quite controversial. How do you respond to critics who say you've been ungrateful to the institution that gave you everything? Harry's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Ungrateful? Ungrateful? George, let me tell you something about gratitude. I was trapped in a system that cared more about appearances than people. My mother died because of that system. And you want to talk to me about being grateful? I understand the pain of losing your mother was immense, George replied carefully. But don't you think there are more constructive ways to address those concerns than public attacks on your family? Public attacks? Harry's voice pitched higher. I'm telling the truth. Something American journalists used to care about before they became lapdogs for the establishment. You're sitting there judging me for speaking honestly about my experiences while you've spent your entire career protecting the same corrupt systems that destroyed my family. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire. George's hands remained steady on his desk, but his eyes had gone cold. Prince Harry, I think you're confusing honest reporting with personal vendettas. There's a difference between seeking truth and airing family grievances on international television for profit. Profit? Harry shot back, his composure completely gone now. You think this is about money? George, I have more money than you'll ever see. This is about justice, about holding powerful people accountable. Concepts that seem foreign to American journalism these days. American journalism, George said slowly, his voice carrying a warning, has exposed corruption at the highest levels of government, brought down presidents, and held the powerful accountable when others wouldn't. So I'd be very careful about making sweeping statements about things you clearly don't understand. Harry leaned forward aggressively. Don't understand? I've been inside power my entire life. I've seen how the game is really played while you've been on the outside begging for scraps of information from press secretaries. The insult was too much. George's professional facade cracked completely. You know what, Prince Harry? George said, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. I've had enough of your condescending attitude. You come into my studio, insult our veterans, attack American journalism, and act like the world owes you something because you happen to be born into the right family. That's not how this works. Harry's eyes widened in shock. He clearly hadn't expected pushback from what he assumed would be another fawning American interviewer. Excuse me? Harry sputtered. Do you know who you're talking to? I'm talking to someone who seems to have forgotten basic manners. George replied coolly. Your title doesn't give you the right to come on national television and disrespect millions of Americans who serve their country with honor. The studio crew stood frozen. In 25 years of Good Morning America, nobody had ever seen George Stephanopoulos drop his diplomatic tone. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the unprecedented confrontation. Harry's face flushed red. Basic manners? You're lecturing me about manners? I'm a member of the British royal family. I don't need etiquette lessons from a former political operative turned morning show host. Former political operative? George's voice rose slightly. You mean someone who actually worked in government instead of just being born into it? Someone who earned their position through merit instead of genetics? The insult hit home. Harry shot to his feet, towering over the seated anchor. How dare you? I've served my country in ways you could never comprehend. I've put my life on the line while you were playing politics in Washington. Sit down, George commanded, his voice carrying decades of authority. You're on live television and you're embarrassing yourself. But Harry was beyond reason now. I will not sit down. I will not be spoken to like this by someone who's never faced real adversity. You have no idea what it's like to carry the weight of an entire institution on your shoulders. The weight of an institution? George stood up now, matching Harry's energy. You mean the institution that gave you palaces to live in, millions of dollars, and global recognition? That terrible burden of never having to worry about paying rent or finding a job? My heart bleeds. The sarcasm dripped from every word. Harry's hands clenched into fists. You think this is a joke? My mother died because of the pressure from that institution. The press hounded her to death, and now you're doing the same thing to my family. Don't you dare, George's voice turned ice cold. Use your mother's tragedy to deflect from your own behavior. Your mother was beloved by millions of Americans. She would be ashamed of how you're acting right now. The mention of his mother in this context seemed to break something inside Harry. His voice became shrill, desperate. She would be ashamed? She would be ashamed of me for finally telling the truth? For refusing to play the game that killed her? You have no right to speak about my mother. I have every right, George shot back, because she represented dignity and grace under pressure. Everything you're failing to demonstrate right now. She faced real criticism with class. You can't even handle basic questions about your choices. Harry began pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. Basic questions? You call attacking my service basic questions? You call dismissing my trauma basic questions? Your trauma? George's eyebrows raised. Let me tell you about trauma. Trauma is American soldiers coming home from Afghanistan missing limbs and struggling with PTSD while being ignored by the system. Trauma is not being criticized for attacking your family in public interviews. Those soldiers signed up for that, Harry shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. They chose that life. I never had a choice. I was born into a prison. The studio went dead silent. Even Harry seemed to realize he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But George was ready with a response that would cut deeper than any sword. A prison? George's voice was deadly quiet now. A prison with servants, private jets, and unlimited resources? Tell that to actual prisoners. Tell that to people born into real poverty who would give anything for your opportunities. Harry's breathing became rapid and shallow. You don't understand the pressure. The constant scrutiny, the expectations. The pressure of what exactly? George pressed, sensing weakness. The pressure of ribbon-cutting ceremonies, royal galas, charity photo ops? Compare that to a single parent working 3 jobs to feed their children, or a veteran sleeping on the streets, or a cancer patient choosing between medication and rent. "Stop!" Harry yelled, his voice cracking. "Just stop! You're twisting everything I say." "I'm not twisting anything," George replied calmly. "I'm giving you perspective, something you seem to lack despite your privileged education and world travels." Harry pointed an accusatory finger at George. "Privileged? Everything I have came with strings attached. Every decision I made was controlled by someone else. You sit there in your little anchor chair thinking you understand power, but you've never been a prisoner of it." "A prisoner who could walk away anytime he wanted," George observed. "Which you eventually did. So what exactly are you complaining about now?" The logic trap was perfect. Harry opened and closed his mouth several times, unable to form a coherent response. Finally, he found his voice, but it was filled with pure venom. "You know what, George? This is exactly why Americans will never understand true nobility. You're a nation of shopkeepers and social climbers who think money equals class. You worship celebrity, but hate actual aristocracy." The studio erupted in gasps. Even the camera operators stopped pretending to work and stared in shock. George's face turned to stone. "True nobility?" he repeated slowly. "True nobility is how you treat people who can't do anything for you. True nobility is grace under pressure. True nobility is putting others before yourself. By that definition, there's not a noble bone in your body." Harry's face contorted with rage. "How dare you lecture me about nobility? My bloodline goes back 1,000 years. Your family probably came over on a boat in steerage." The racist undertones in the comment were unmistakable. The studio fell so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. George stared at Harry for a long moment, then slowly shook his head. "Your bloodline?" George repeated, his voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "Let me tell you something about bloodlines, Prince Harry. My grandparents came to this country with nothing but hope and determination. They built something from nothing through hard work and sacrifice. That's a bloodline I'm proud of. What you're displaying right now isn't nobility. It's bigotry wrapped in a crown." Harry's face went pale, then flushed crimson. He realized his mask had slipped completely, revealing the ugly prejudice beneath his royal facade. "I didn't mean it like that," he stammered. "But the damage was already done." "Oh, you meant it exactly like that," George continued, his voice gaining strength. "You meant every word. Because when entitled people feel cornered, their true nature comes out. And what we're seeing right now is who you really are underneath the designer suits and charity appearances." The control room was in chaos. Producers frantically debated whether to cut to commercial, but the ratings were through the roof. America was watching a prince have a complete meltdown on live television. Harry desperately tried to regain control. "You're putting words in my mouth. I simply meant that Americans don't understand the weight of history, the responsibility that comes with centuries of tradition." "Centuries of tradition?" George's laugh was harsh and humorless. "You mean centuries of people bowing to you because of who your ancestors were? That's not tradition. That's inherited entitlement. And the fact that you think bloodline determines worth tells us everything we need to know about your character." "My character?" Harry's voice cracked with desperation. "You don't know anything about my character. You don't know what I've been through, the sacrifices I've made." "Sacrifices?" George leaned forward, his eyes blazing. "You sacrificed a life of unearned luxury and unlimited resources to become a multi-millionaire celebrity in California. That's not sacrifice, that's a career change." Harry began gesturing wildly, his composure completely shattered. "You're twisting everything. I gave up my military career. I gave up my royal duties." "You gave up a ceremonial military position you got because of your name?" George shot back. "And you gave up royal duties to cash in on royal secrets. Every decision you've made has been about maximizing your own benefit while playing the victim." "Victim?" Harry screamed, his voice echoing through the studio. "I'm not playing anything. I'm the victim here. Of this interview, of the press, of a system that never cared about me." "Listen to yourself," George said with disgust. "A grown man with every advantage in life, screaming about being a victim on national television. Your grandfather served in World War II with actual courage. Your grandmother dedicated her entire life to service, without complaint. And you're here throwing a tantrum because people expect you to act with basic decency." The comparison to his beloved grandparents seemed to trigger something primal in Harry. his eyes filled with tears of rage. Don't you dare bring them into this. They lived in a different time. They didn't have to deal with social media and 24-hour news cycles. No, George agreed coldly. They had to deal with actual wars and real threats to their survival. They faced down Hitler and rebuilt a nation. You can't handle criticism on Twitter. Harry was hyperventilating now, his royal bearing completely destroyed. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This hostile, aggressive questioning. This is what drove my mother to her death. Stop, George commanded, his voice cutting through Harry's hysteria like a knife. Stop using your mother's memory as a shield for your behavior. She died in a car accident, not from answering tough questions. And using her death to deflect from your own failures is beneath contempt. The brutal honesty hit Harry like a physical blow. For a moment, he stood there swaying, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Then something inside him snapped completely. "You have no right," he shrieked, pointing accusingly at George. "No right to judge me. I am royalty. I am better than you, better than everyone in this pathetic country." The studio fell into absolute silence. Even Harry seemed shocked by what had come out of his mouth. But George was ready with the perfect response. "There it is," George said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of America. "The real Prince Harry. Not the grieving son or the struggling veteran or the mental health advocate. Just an entitled brat who thinks he's better than everyone else because of an accident of birth." Harry's hands were shaking now. I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," George interrupted. "You meant every word, and I think the American people have heard enough." Security. 2 security guards appeared at the edge of the set, moving slowly toward the guest area. Harry looked around wildly, finally realizing the gravity of his situation. "You can't do this to me," he protested, his voice high and desperate. "I'm a member of the British royal family, and this is American television," George replied with iron finality. "Your title means nothing here. Your behavior speaks for itself, and right now, it's saying you need to leave." Harry tried one last desperate gambit. "If you kick me off, it will be an international incident. The British government will hear about this." George's smile was coldly satisfied. "Let them. They can watch the replay just like everyone else. They'll see exactly who you really are when you think nobody important is watching." The security guards reached Harry's position. One of them spoke quietly. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Harry looked around the studio one final time, seeing nothing but disgust and disappointment on every face. His royal mask was gone forever, replaced by the ugly truth of his entitled, bigoted character. "This isn't over," he muttered, as the guards escorted him toward the exit. "Yes," George called after him. "It Island." As Harry disappeared through the studio doors, George turned back to the camera. His professional composure had returned, but there was steel in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "We'll be right back after this commercial break," he said calmly, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. America had just watched a prince reveal himself to be nothing more than a privileged, entitled man-child who couldn't handle being challenged. And George Stephanopoulos had done what 25 years of experience had prepared him to do. He had asked the tough questions and let the truth speak for itself. The interview was over.